here at Calvary Worship Centre. It's fantastic. Hey, really enjoyed that time of worship, and I'm going to carry this around so okay. Really enjoyed our time of worship this morning. You know, one of the things that is a distinctive, if you like, of we Pentecostals is we love worship. We love praising our Lord. Is that right? I'm in the right place here, aren't I? Yeah. I'm pretty sure of that. And in fact, I was talking to someone yesterday. I was at a farewell for a good friend of mine who's retired. He was one of my lecturers years back now, but great guy. And talking to someone else in the context of this farewell gathering of about 80 people, that somebody asked me, what's different about Pentecostals? This person wasn't a Pentecostal. And my comment was, the thing about Pentecostals is that they expect that God's going to turn up and do something. And I think that gets reflected in our passion for worship, because we understand, we know God is with us, God is present, and we're worshipping Him. And I want to address that issue somewhat this morning, this element of what is it about worship that is so important for us as Christians. And we're going to do it in a slightly different way. Normally I have a PowerPoint. We're not going to have a PowerPoint today. In fact, I want you to have your Bibles in hand. We're going to be opening up our Bibles in a moment and just going through them. But one of the... Jesus talked about this element of worship. In fact, when he spoke to the lady at the well, I don't know if you remember the story, it's in John 4, we're not going to look at it because of time. But Jesus was engaging with this woman at the well, and because we know the story that she ended up, she'd had numbers of husbands, and the guy that she was living with at that point in time wasn't her husband. And there's this interesting conversation was going on between Jesus and this woman, but Jesus was starting to get a little bit too close to the truth. And it began to get a little bit uncomfortable for the woman, understandably. And he called her out on the fact that the guy that she was living with at the moment wasn't her husband. And so she tried to divert the discussion. It was getting a little bit uncomfortable for her, and she said, so she raised a theological question. It's always a good thing to do if things are getting uncomfortable. Raise a theological question and see what happens. So her comment was, our fathers tell us that we should worship here in Samaria, and you Jews say that you should worship in Jerusalem. What do you think? So she's throwing out this theological question, and Jesus' response to her is really instructive for us about the nature and the purpose and the importance of worship. And he says that in verse 21 of chapter 4, we won't turn to it, he says, "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither in this mountain, neither in Samaria, nor in Jerusalem." Then he says, "You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is of the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth." In spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship him in spirit and in truth. And basically what he's saying is, it's not about where we worship. That's not the big deal. It's not even how we worship. That's not the big deal. The real issue is who we're worshipping. Who we are worshipping. And because God is looking for true worshippers, those that worship in spirit, in other words, out of the life of the Holy Spirit within us. It's not just coming out of ourselves, but it's something that God has generated within us and we're engaging with, and it's reflecting our true heart to the heart of God. And what I want to do is we're going to do a journey through the book of Hebrews. And I'm thinking, oh wow, book of Hebrews. Now this is going to be exciting. Alright, this is going to be good. Because the writer of and we don't know who the writer was for the book of Hebrews. Lots of people have lots of ideas, but we just simply don't know who it was. But he had discovered something that was so powerful and so important to him. And I want us to go through this journey and see what we can find about this element, this thing about worship, who we are worshipping and why it is so important to us. And what actually happens when we worship? That's what I want us to land on. What actually happens when we worship? So he starts off, and if you've got your Bibles there, and you can open them up to Hebrews chapter 1, and we're just going to start at verse 1 through to verse 3. It says, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he also made the universe. We're talking about God, our Creator, who has been revealed to us through his Son. And this is the Christian revelation, of course, that God is not just a singular God. God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He has always dwelt in perfect harmony within the threeness of his being. The original family, the original small group. God is deeply, deeply relational by nature, simply because of who he is. He is a triune being, Father, Son, and Spirit. And what the writer of Hebrews is wanting us to understand is that the Son is the final word, the last word about who God is. If you want to, in fact, Jesus himself said, if you want to see the Father, if you want to know the Father, just look at me. Because Jesus is the reflection of the Father. Everything that we want to know about God, we can see in Jesus, because Jesus, the writer of Hebrews, is telling us, Jesus is the final word. He's the last word about who God is and how God wants to engage with us. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets. That was all good. That was God working, speaking through them, and in many times, in many ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. Verse 3, the Son is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. And after he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. In chapter 1, basically, we're just going to do a really quick overview through the book of Hebrews. In chapter 1, the writer emphasises the divinity of Jesus. The Son is God. He's not only the Son of God, he is God the Son. He emphasises the divinity of the Son. Then in chapter 2, he emphasises the humanity of Christ, the humanity of Jesus, that God took on human flesh in his Son. In fact, in chapter 2, and verse 14, he says, if you follow these, and you just open up, just click over chapter 2, verse 14, since the children had flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he may break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all of their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. Surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, that he might make atonement for the sins of the people, because he himself suffered when he was tempted. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Here, the writer is pointing out the fact that God became human. In fact, he had to become human if he was going to redeem us, if he was going to enter into our lostness, our sinfulness. God had to become like us in order to redeem us from that situation. And because he has taken on humanity, he is able to relate to the reality of our situations. And then in chapter 3, he introduces us to what I call the both-and nature of Jesus' ministry. He is both divine and he is human, because he is both apostle and high priest. In verse 1 of chapter 3, he says, therefore, holy brothers and sisters who share in the heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, whom we acknowledge as our apostle and our high priest. Now, this is really powerful. I want us to just reflect on this idea for a moment or two. He is both apostle and high priest. Because I teach Bible college, who knows what an apostle means? What does it mean to be an apostle? Apostolos, okay. So why don't I just tell you? That's probably the simplest. It means a sent one. An apostle is someone who is sent. sent by God. So Jesus is our apostle. He's the one who's been sent by the Father into our world, into our situation in human form. But he is also, he's our high priest. So his apostleship is in recognition of his divinity, sent by the Father, sent as God, as the Son, into our world in human flesh. But he's also our high priest. Now, a high priest or a priest is someone who stands in the gap, so to speak, for somebody else. And so as our apostle, Jesus is representing God to us. He's speaking for God. We've already heard about that in chapter 1. He's the last word. He's the final word about who God is through his Son. So he represents God to us. But as our high priest, he represents us to God. And he can do that because he became human. He can actually represent us. Now, just think about this for a moment. God, located in a human body. Have you ever thought about the limitations that we have, that we're trapped in a human body? That means a few things. We can only be one place at one time. It's true. I'm here at the moment, and because I'm here, I can't be anywhere else. All right, that's part of the limitations of being human, being in a physical body. We can only be one place at one time. We get tired. True? Yeah, we get tired, we get hungry, we need sleep, we need food, and then we need to get rid of our food, either through energy or other ways. We're not going to go into that, but these are all part of the limitations of just being human. Now, think about this for a moment. We're talking about God, who is inherently eternal. God, who is inherently unlimited, is inherently infinite, can be everywhere at the one point in time, suddenly finds himself restricted and limited in a human body. That was Jesus' experience. He did that because he loves us. He did that because he wanted to redeem us from our situation, and he can sympathise. In fact, in chapter 4, we're flicking over now, chapter 4, verses 14 to 18, he says, "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to feel sympathy for our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." Think about this for a minute. Here's Jesus now, Son of God, the eternal Son of God, God the Son, restricted now in a human body. He gets tired. He needs to eat. He needs to sleep. He experiences all of in fact, Scripture tells us that he was tempted in every way, just as you and I are. Whatever temptations you experience, whatever you got tempted with yesterday, Jesus got tempted with that. Because he was human. So he totally, fully, completely understands our limitations, the limitations of the reality of being human. He understands the struggles that we have because of our limitedness. He understands every single temptation that you and I go through. That is amazing. This is how good our God is. He has completely identified himself with us in every way, shape or form. And yet, it says he was without sin. In fact, Jesus is the only one who can do that. He is the only one who can do that. Because he was both human and divine. And he was tempted, and those temptations were real. He was not impervious to the temptations that we face, but because of technically the theological position is that because Jesus had dual natures, he was both divine and human, that he was able always to surrender his human nature to his divine nature, and so he was able to never sin. You and I cannot do that. I'm sure we've all realised that now. Okay, we're human, and one of the really, in fact, it's a liberating thing when you get your head around it. Because we're human, that means several things. But one thing it means is that we're not God. Now, I'm sure we've all recognised that we're not God. Okay, and we simply don't have the capacity to not sin. We don't have that capacity. You and I will sin today. It's part of our humanness. It's not something to beat ourselves up about. That's just the reality of who we are. And yet, God has chosen to create us nonetheless, knowing that we would sin, because we know that because Jesus was the Lamb that was slain from before the foundation of the world. And yet, knowing that that was going to be part of our weakness, he loved us so much that he said, you know what, I'm not going to leave them in that situation. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to do something for them that they cannot do for themselves. In fact, could never do for themselves. I'm going to engage with them in a way that enables them to ultimately live the same way that I do. And we won't enjoy that until the resurrection. But that's coming. That's part of the promise that God has for us. So Jesus totally understands all of your limitations, all of my limitations, because he's experienced them in his humanity. And and I love the way that the writer of Hebrews says this: since therefore we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith that we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to feel sympathy for our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence. Let's approach his throne of grace with confidence, not out of fear that we're going to get wrapped over the knuckles because, I blew it again. Of course you did, you're a human being. That's just part of the deal. Now, that's not licensed, don't get me wrong, that's not licensed to go out and sin as much as you like. But just understand the reality, the fact that we will never be perfect until Jesus comes back. And he loves us anyway. We enter into Jesus' perfection. That's our position by faith. Then in chapter 5, in verse 1 of chapter 5, he begins to touch on the role of a high priest. He says, every high priest is selected among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. That's exactly what Jesus did for us, of course, on the cross. As a high priest, he offered his life, himself, as our sin offering to the Father, so that we could receive his forgiveness and his righteousness, his grace as a result. But now he's just simply talking about the ministry of the high priest, and he's going to relate that then to the ministry of Jesus as our high priest, which he begins then to touch on in chapter 6. If you're following it through in your Bible, we're going to quickly look at chapter 6, verses 19 and 20. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain, where our forerunner, Jesus, has entered on our behalf. Jesus, as our high priest, has entered into the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies in heaven, on our behalf as our forerunner. He's entered on our behalf. He becomes a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And in chapter 7 he draws on the analogy of Melchizedek, who was, we won't look at it, but he was both king of Salem, he was a king, but he was also a priest of God. So there's this dual role of king and priest, and the writer then makes the analogy, well, this is Jesus' situation as well. He's both king and our priest. He's our apostle and our high priest. And he refers back to Psalm 110 to make those connections. Then in chapter 8, we come to the high point, and this is where I want to spend the rest of our time fundamentally looking at what happens to our worship, because Jesus is both our high priest and he is also the leader of our worship. Let's jump into that and see what Scripture has got to say about that. In Hebrews 8 verses 1 and 2, for those that are following in your Bible. Now the main point of what we're saying is this: we do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by a mere human being. So the picture that's being painted, the Old Covenant was a picture of the tabernacle, what have you, was a picture of actually what was in heaven. The true tabernacle is in heaven, and the tabernacle under the Old Covenant, that was simply a representation of the reality, the eternal reality. And the high priest would, once a year, would go into the Holy of Holies. He would carry the blood of an innocent animal in with him, and this would be, and it was placed on the mercy seat, and that was for the forgiveness of the sins of the whole nation of Israel. And the reality of that picture is that when the high priest, once a year on the Day of Atonement, walked into that Holy of Holies with the blood, the innocent blood of a sacrificial lamb, it was as if every single person in the nation walked in with him, because he was their representative. The whole nation, as it were, walked into that Holy of Holies and were forgiven of their past sins on the basis of that blood sacrifice of an innocent animal, which of course pictures the blood that Jesus shed on the cross of Calvary for every single one of us. He opens this up a little bit further in chapter 9 of Hebrews 24 to 28. It says, "For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with human hands, that was only a copy of the true one. He entered into heaven itself, now to appear for us in God's presence. Nor did he enter heaven to offer himself again and again, the way that the high priest enters the holy place every year with blood that was not his own. Otherwise, Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world. But he has appeared once for all at the culmination of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself. Just as people are destined to die once, and after that face judgment, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him." It's a beautiful picture of the way that the high priest, as the representative of the people, would walk into that Holy of Holies with the blood of an innocent sacrifice and represent the whole nation. And it was as if every single person, every single Israeli walked in there with the high priest. And the point, of course, that he's making is that this is exactly what Jesus has done for us. Now, I want to go back to chapter 8, and we're just going to focus in on verses 1 and 2 again, and then we're going to look at 3 points we're going to pull out of that, and then we're done, okay? And we'll apply what we're talking about. Hebrews 8 verses 1 and 2. I'm going to read this one this time from the New Living Translation. I just like the way that it puts it. Now here's the main point. We have a high priest who sat down in the place of honour beside the throne of the majestic God in heaven. There he ministers in the heavenly tabernacle, the true place of worship. that was built by the Lord and not by human hands. Or as the way the Message puts it, those same two verses condensed. He says, in essence, we have such a high priest, authoritative, right alongside God, conducting worship in the one true sanctuary built by God. Jesus is actually our worship leader. He's our high priest, and he leads us in our worship. Now let's just unpack that thought. There's three simple things I want us to just focus in on. We're going to look at a couple of other scriptures within Hebrews on each of these points. So firstly, as our high priest, Jesus has secured access for us in our present state. Our present state of imperfection, our present state of incompleteness, our present state of limitations. He has secured access for every single one of us into the holy place where he himself is. And he's done that through his blood. A couple of verses, all of these are in Hebrews. So Hebrews 4:16, which we read a little bit earlier, just the one verse says, let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. You know, when we find ourselves in a place of temptation. And as I said, that happens to us every single day. Every single day. When we find ourselves in that place of temptation, or those places of temptation, Scripture tells us that we can go to our high priest and we can receive mercy and we can find grace to help us, to strengthen us. In other words, to say no to those temptations as they're occurring. Now, we're never going to do that perfectly. So don't beat yourself up about this, all right? We just don't have the capacity. We're not God. We don't have the capacity to pull that off perfectly all the time. But God's made this provision for us to be able to go to him and to get better at this as we go along. We're in training for the day when in the resurrection it will be completed fully. God has secured access for us in our present state. God's not saying, you've got to be perfect. You've got to be a good little boy and girl before you can have access. No, he said, no. I've secured access to you, just as you are. Just come. Acknowledge me. Acknowledge your lordship, my lordship over your life. Acknowledge your shortcomings, but come, and you'll find mercy. You'll receive grace to help you in your time of need. And then he goes on to say also in chapter 10. He says, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain that is his body. And since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with full assurance that faith brings. See, he's not saying you've got to be perfect before this can happen. No, he's saying just come. Just acknowledge me, your Lord. Acknowledge that you're coming in my name. Acknowledge your need. Acknowledge your shortcomings and come. You will find grace to help. You'll find strength. You'll find forgiveness. Everything is there. Just come. Let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed in pure water. God has granted us access into his presence in our current state. That, my friends, is good news. Amen? That's good news. We can come as we are. He's not expecting us to be perfect. Our perfection is only in Jesus. And his perfection is perfect. We've been accepted in him. Second point, not only has he granted us access, but our great high priest, Jesus, is continually interceding for us in our present state as our representative before God. In chapter 7 of Hebrews and in chapter 9, I'm just going to read out two scriptures for you here. 7 verses 23 and 25 if you follow me in your own Bible. Now, there are many of those priests, talking about the priests under the Old Covenant, there are many of those priests, since death prevented them from continuing in office. In other words, they died, they weren't eternal. But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. Again, just paint the picture. Let me paint the picture that the writer of Hebrews is saying here to us. Jesus has already entered into the Holy of Holies. He has an eternal priesthood now, similar to that was of Melchizedek. And the writer is telling us that he is continually interceding for us. He's saying, Andrew, I saw that temptation that you faced yesterday, and I'm praying for you, bride. I love you. I'm strengthening you. And he's doing that for every single one of us. Because we all desperately need his intercession on our behalf. Because again, we simply can't make it on our own. We don't have the capacity. We're not God. We need his intercession on our behalf continually in our lives to strengthen us, to give us direction, to grant us forgiveness, and as we continue to walk on in God. He is continually interceding. In verse 24 of chapter 9, he says, "For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with human hands, that was only a copy of the true one. He entered heaven itself, now to appear for us in God's presence." He is continually appearing before God, the Father, on our behalf. Why? Because we desperately need that. Because we're not perfect. And that work isn't completed in us until Jesus comes back. So he's granted us access. He intercedes on our behalf, continually, all the time. And we desperately need that. The third point, and this is the one I want to land on and finish on. As our great high priest, Jesus brings the prayers and the praises, our prayers and our praises, to God. He sanctifies them and he makes them perfect. And he can do that because he is the leader of our worship. Let me read two scriptures again, both out of Hebrews. The first one out of chapter 2, verses 11 to 12. It says, "Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are the same family." Talking about Jesus and us, his followers, his believers, his brothers and sisters. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. And then he quotes from the Psalms. He says, "I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly, I will sing your praises." Now, think about this for a moment. This morning, as we were gathered here singing our praises, and that was a great time of worship, wasn't it? I just enjoyed just how great is our God and worshiping him. The writer of Hebrews says that Jesus was actually here singing with us. How does he put it exactly there? So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. In fact, he says, "I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly, I will sing your praises." Jesus was here. He was singing through us our praises. Did you sense his presence? Amen? We ought to be sensing his presence. Whenever we worship, we should be aware of his presence. Because he's here, Jesus. In fact, he said, "I'll never leave you nor forsake you." He's always with us. We're not always aware of his presence. That's something we need to learn to develop. The awareness of God's presence. And times of worship are a wonderful time that we can do that. Not only then, but that is a great time. And then last scripture, Hebrews 13 verse 15 says, "Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name." Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that openly profess his name. Through Jesus. When we were singing, whether it's here as a congregation whether it's in our own personal devotional life, or when we're driving the car down the street, and our lives are to be a worship to God. Jesus is always with us. He is taking our worship and he is offering it to the Father on our behalf. Now, going back to the verse that we're hinging this on, chapter 8 and verse 2, where we're saying, the main point that we're saying is this: we do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty, who serves in the sanctuary. He is the minister. He's the high priest. What do high priests do? They minister to God on behalf of the people. The word, I know that you're going to be so excited about this, the Greek word, liturgos. In classical Greek, it meant, or it was, the liturgos was a public servant who ministered to the people, or for the people, on for the overall benefit of all the people. There was something that somebody did for the greater good for the greater people. And this again is exactly what Jesus is doing for us. So right now, Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father in the Holy of Holies, and he is offering to the Father your life, my life, your praises, your worship. So as we worship, Jesus is, as we're offering our sacrifice of praise to him, because it's all about Jesus, what he's done for us, he is gathering up that worship and he is offering it to the Father on our behalf. And not only is he offering it to the Father, he is perfecting it. He is sanctifying it. All of our worship is limited. It's imperfect. We never worship as we should, because we can't. We're not God. But Jesus, who is our high priest, he is God. He loves hearing our worship. He gathers it all up and then he sanctifies it and he offers it to the Father. That's what's actually happening when we're worshipping God. It's not just something that we're doing. Yes, we're doing it, obviously, because it's coming out of our heart, but there is something far greater than just what's happening in this room or in our own private prayer room, whatever it might be. There is a dynamic that is taking place. God, Jesus, is gathering up our sacrifices of praise and prayers, our acts of service, all of those things. He gathers them up. He sanctifies them and purifies them. He says, Father, this is what my brothers and sisters are doing for you. And he offers it to him. And the Father says, wow, I love this. I accept this. I'm just going to continue to pour out my blessings on the people, because that's the way it works. There is a reciprocal element and nature that is inherent within our God that is so powerful and so beautiful. So he's given us access. We can go in to the Holy of Holies because of Jesus, because Jesus is already in there for us. Okay, he's interceding for us. And he is gathering up our worship, our prayers, our acts of service, and sanctifying them, making them holy, making them pure, and offering them to the Father on our behalf. So I want you to think about that. Next time, in fact, next song that we're about to have, we're going to be offering some more worship. Think about what's actually happening. This is not just noise that we're making that's not even getting above the ceiling. This is to Jesus. He is offering it to the Father on our behalf. It is a truly powerful and beautiful thing. And he can do that because he is both our apostle and our high priest. He is both God and man. And he alone has the capacity to do that on our behalf. Let's pray together. Father, I want to thank you for the truth of your word. And Lord, my prayer is that you would take my simple words, my incomplete, maybe even incoherent at times, words, and that you accept them, that you sanctify them, as you do for all of our acts of service, prayer and praise, and you purify them and you offer them to the Father on our behalf. And Lord, I want to thank you for that. Lord, I pray that you would help us to become so more acutely aware of the reality of what is happening, that as we enter into your presence and as we offer our incomplete and our imperfect praise, that you love it, you receive it, you sanctify it, and you present it on our behalf to the Father. Thank you for your goodness and grace for each one of us. In Jesus' name. Amen. Shall we stand?
Let's thank Him this morning because Jesus has made it possible for us to come into the presence of God. In fact, it says that we can come boldly before the throne of grace because of what Jesus has done. And friends, that's an encouragement to you and I, that today we are invited to come boldly. We don't have to come as those who are rejected. We don't have to come as those who are trying to worm their way before God. But we can come as those who are invited because of what Jesus has done. We can come with the knowledge that Jesus is continually interceding for us. That you know what? When we fall and we feel like we failed again in life, that He stands before the Father and He intercedes for us. And He says, God, my blood avails for Andrew. My blood avails for whoever it is this morning who might feel they have fallen and there is no more grace that God can extend to them. That the blood of Jesus cleanses us from all unrighteousness. No matter how far we fall, how many times we fall, His blood avails. And He intercedes for us. And friends, this morning, if you are feeling like you don't have what it takes, that you failed too many times, that even a gracious God could tolerate, the many failures in your life. The message of Hebrews is that God has made a way. And Jesus will always, always reach out in love for us. And friends, this morning, maybe it's an opportunity for some of us who are feeling just that way today, that maybe we've fallen too far for grace to reach us, that God's love is extended to our lives. And friends, Jesus will stand before the throne of heaven and intercede for you and I.